Yo people, welcome back to another video. Now Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 2 is finally out and I'll be going through the good, the bad and what's next for Part 3. Before I carry on, I'd appreciate if you could hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below on Part 2 and any predictions that you'll have for Part 3. Also, if you could sub to the channel as we are closing in on the 800 subscribers goal, that would be massively appreciated. So let's start with the good, and where else to begin than with Miguel. He carried the entire organization even when he was angry. He didn't lose focus, he stayed in check, and it's what a real athlete would react after not getting the captaincy. In his head, he's like, cool, I didn't get it, but I'm still going to give 100% for the team. Other characters and other people in real life would probably let this get to them. They'd get sad about it. They do the self-victimization thing. But Miguel, he actually upped his game even further. And I know Mr. Miyagi was smiling from the heavens watching that performance from Miguel. I really liked seeing Miguel tap into his anger, his kind of Cobra Kai ways, outside the tournament, inside the tournament, having that whole iron sharpens iron mentality, not being afraid to tell Robbie or Johnny when they're in the wrong or when he's upset with them. And it's things like this that shows a lot of character, and as someone who's into sports, I just like these type of moments. The next good was the Miyagi stuff. I think it was cool to see a young Miyagi. I hope we get to see more of those kind of moments, especially as a real flashback. The CGI for Pat Morita as well, that was a nice touch to the show. I'm glad they didn't milk it either. Also, in terms of the whole Miyagi killing someone incident, I still feel like there's more to it. There's more to this story, and I think Part 3 will carry that on in Daniel's head and make him keep searching for the answers, especially with Kwon's death. For me, I think Daniel is definitely going to be the most affected by Kwon's death, especially since he saw it coming from a mile away and he'll feel like he could have prevented it. And this brings me to my next positive, which I'll do as a 2-in-1, and it's Kwon alongside his death. Now, I don't mean that Kwon dying was good, but the show finally had the balls to go there and kill someone, which is something that I've personally been waiting for from this show. However, I do think a lot of people will probably be triggered. I know Kwon had a lot of support and he created a big fan base, so yeah, I think people are going to get triggered. But for me, the only reason I'm not kind of annoyed about this is because I think the death will have a bigger purpose in Part 3. However, like I said, if they did this to Kwon just for a shock value cliffhanger ending, then this point will turn into a negative. And a quick shout out to Brandon H. Lee, who did a great job with Kwon as a villain, and it does hurt a bit to see him not coming back, especially since it was such a short-lived character. But yeah, I think Kwon was great as a villain. Another good point I want to big up was the fighting. It seemed a lot faster, a lot more intense, and it shows how far the show has actually come to be putting on this much work from the actors, from the choreography, the stunt doubles, everyone involved. Next is the Iron Dragons in particular, and they impressed a lot in my opinion, although I do have some negatives for Axel and Zara, which I'll say later on. But in general, their incorporation into the tournament, from head of the table down to the fighters, they really built them up to be a threatening dojo on all levels, which ties into my next good point, which was the return of Terry Silver, the main villain of this show. The guy just embodies what it's like to be a villain, and it was just good to see him back. Him being out of Part 1 for me did affect the show, but the show will always be elevated with a guy of Terry Silver's stature. Next up is Chosen. I think although he's made to be this comic relief out of all the adults, I believe he actually came in clutch with Johnny and Daniel and their whole situations. He would actually help their dynamic as the senseis and help the other two stay focused, especially when Daniel was being kidnapped or Johnny was having the whole Carmen incident. He was actually pretty clutch when it actually came to being serious. Now, my last points were some of the dynamics in Miyagi-Do. I really liked the Miguel and Robbie dynamic, was really good. Being grown men, talking their problems out, being honest with each other. It's good to see how far they've come, because if this was before, they would have started fighting. So a lot of development, and it's nice to see them just being able to be honest with each other. And lastly, Kenny and Devon. I really enjoyed that. My boy Kenny finally got to cook at the big stage. I'm glad the show gave Devon her moment to shine as well. So yeah, those dynamics in particular stood out for me in Miyagi-Do. Now on to the bad, unfortunately, and we'll start with the whole romance thing. Way too forced from top to bottom. I thought these guys were meant to be in Barcelona, but the way they were acting, it was as if they were in Ibiza or something. With the amount of sex and the flirting and the relationship drama, we had obviously got the Robbie and Tori one, which is the main one, that's fine. But it gets watered down by the whole Robbie and Zara, Dimitri and Maria, Chosen and Kim, even Axel and Sam, even though Sam didn't entertain it. But for me, it was just too much of the same thing going on, and it made Tori and Robbie's situation just seem less important. It should have stayed with Kwon trying to trigger Robbie with Tori, Tori. Maybe Zara gets involved a little bit, but overall Robbie is smart enough to not get fooled and he ignores all of it. That's how it should have gone. Speaking of Robbie, he is in my negatives slightly. Now, I'm not a Robbie fan personally, but I think they did him a disservice with how many losses he took at the start, and it was non-stop this dumb freeze stare at Tori thing which made him lose. He went on to redeem himself after and he found himself towards the end. Those pep talks with Miguel and everything, that helped, but I just don't like how they kind of made him look too weak at the beginning. I understand he's thrown off balance and stuff, but he wasn't even getting a single point. And another thing that I would have wanted to see here is Johnny, his actual dad, speaking to him. Them having a moment. Johnny says, "I'm proud to be your dad, like this is a massive thing," or something. I don't know, give me a moment with those two. Like they're literally blood related and we got nothing. But instead of getting that, we got more of the same Johnny and Daniel. They're still arguing. Not only do they go into part 2 disagreeing, they make up and then they disagree for a second time in part 2, which Miguel has to break up immediately. Which again is just repetitive. They should just be on the same page right now. Like there's bigger things to do, but they still find a way to bring up this whole arguing thing, which is boring by now. But moving on to the next negative, it was Dimitri. Now I've never liked his character, to be honest. However, here he got shat on way too much. He did nothing in the tournament. He was just causing the group to lose or creating more problems with Hawk and then with Kenny. Not to mention the fact that he cheated on his girlfriend, even though she's annoying. But yeah, I don't know how people can still like this guy after this part. I'm sorry, like I said, I don't like this character, but I think they went a bit too far with dunking on this guy. Another negative I have is that I feel like part 1 and the trailers for part 2 hyped this tournament up to be super brutal and just physically draining, but in reality it wasn't as bad as what we were hyped up to be. Of course, the fighting, the choreography, it was all good, but I personally expected more blood, more bruises, more damage, some more injuries. Literally the 2 blood scenes that we saw, they were literally put in the trailer already, so it wasn't really that brutal and that intense compared to how they were hyping it up. Another negative I have is the conveniences. Some of the stuff felt like it just had to happen because the script said so and they're running out of time and they need to move the plot along. Things like Sam randomly walking onto the beach and finding Axel, Tori conveniently coming out of the lift to see Zara kissing Robbie, things like that. Speaking of Zara, let's talk about her and Axel. Now, I didn't like Zara's whole social media stuff because it made her look gimmicky when I feel like she should have been flat out serious. She should be the type to look at someone doing the gimmicky social media thing and think that it's pathetic to do that. But I don't know, this whole social media thing, it's realistic to the current times we live in, of course, so I understand that, but it makes her look less threatening if she's doing an Instagram live in the middle of a tournament. As for Axel, I think he's just way too OP right now. He blocked absolutely everything just by standing there. His attacks were OP, his defense was OP, even destroying Robbie 5-0, and then Miguel really couldn't land any punches on him in the brawl. It was a bit crazy, so I hope they fix that in part 3, but it's going to be a big task now to make an OP character take a realistic L after just being untouchable in this part. So it's going to be a tricky task, but I hope they can do it. But yeah, overall, I think part 2 was fine. I think I expected the tone to be a lot more serious like it was in part 1. I think these time gaps where we have to wait for the show in between just kills the rhythm of the show, and it actually does the show a disservice if I'm being honest. So yeah, we have to wait for part 3 where there's not really a lot to go off of if I'm being honest. We know the Sekai Taikai will get completed, even though in real life it would probably get cancelled. We all know that the death of Kwon is going to affect Daniel the most, and we're going to see part 3 really focus on Daniel and finally connect the pieces with Mr. Miyagi, which will be interesting. But yeah, apart from that, there's not really a lot to go off of. But I do think that they will stick the landing. But yeah, overall, I still enjoyed watching it. Of course, it's not like a super high rating. I need to wait for part 3 to come out to then evaluate the whole of season 6. But yeah, it didn't destroy anything for me like other franchises do. But yeah, as always, thank you to everyone for supporting the channel. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on part 2, any theories you have for part 3, or just anything in general that you want to comment. I'd appreciate if you could hit that like button as well, sub to the channel, and thank you for your time.